this is our topics. This is our lecture in this session. Okay. Firstly, let me show you some results from a survey, CSI survey in 2007. This survey. It's an annual survey in the field of computer crime and security survey. Okay. In 2007, let me show some of the results only. In that time, one of the questions in that survey was this: did your organization experience a security incident in the past 12 months, in the past year? 46% of the users say that yes, 45% say no, and 10% say I don't know. Okay. This chart shows that half of the person in this half of the respondent in this survey says that they had an experience, a security experience in the past years, in the past 12 months. Okay. This is another question. Which technology they use for security in their organizations? 62%. Technology used to evaluate effectiveness of security technologies. Okay. This question is about the evaluation of those security technology, evaluation of effectiveness of those security technology. 63% of the respondents says that we are using internal staffs for security audits. 53% says that we are doing pen test or penetration test by internal staff. 53 says that we are applying security audits by external organization. 49% says that we are using automated tools for security check. 45% says that we are using web activity monitoring softwares. 44% says that we are using email monitoring softwares, and 12% says that we have nothing for this evaluation. Okay, this is another interesting question. If you look on this chart, you can see that clearly. You can see that more than 1/3 of the respondents never use a mix of evaluating technologies. Okay. But which security technology used by those respondents? This one is interesting too. 98.2% says that we are using antivirus in our organization. 90.7% says that we are using firewall. 76% says that we are using anti-spam. 75% use anti-spyware. 52% says that we apply some limitations on computer to install new softwares. 48.9% says that we are using access control list. 47.8% says that we are using physical security, and so on. VPN 46.3, for example. Encrypted login 31.9. Encrypted files 31.9. For example, biometric 4.4% of organization. Only 4% of organization use biometric tools, biometric security tools in their organization. These results have been gathered in 2007, 15 years ago. But they are very interesting. Look at these steps here. You can see some steps, some main and major steps here. For example, here, after encryption, you can see for encrypted files, 22%, but for smart cards, only 6%. There is a big gap here. There is another gap here. Another one here. Another one here. And the last one here. This chart shows that the organization, most of organization avoided to pay too much monies for security. Okay, they just save money. They don't. Mostly they They don't care about the safety and security of their information. Look at this one here. Most of them only use, half of them only use VPN or periodic password change or security, physical security or something like that. Just few of them use newer technology, newer types of technology. Okay. So these results are interesting. These results are interesting. Why? Because they show that the organization are under attack. They are under pressure by the new types of cyber crimes, cyber attacks, or something like that. Okay. If you remember from the last lecture, we said that sometimes some security issues may active some laws, some national laws, international laws, something like that, against us, and we should defend. We should go to court and defend from ourselves. Okay. Why we need, for example, why we need auditing here? We use digital auditing to collect usable courtroom evidence. It's very important. Something happens, it was wrong, and now I should go to court. So I need to collect some useful evidence. Okay, but maybe there are some unauthorized users in my network. I should trace them. Regularly, I should review the security policies in my company. I should understand the fraud techniques, computer fraud techniques. I should be care about the losses, incurred losses. I should analyze them. I should evaluate them. Okay? Different tools, software or hardware tools in network creates some logics. I should understand what are those logs. What should I do if an incident happens? I should understand them. The legal protocols in my organization for handling the incidents. You know, we need to audit. And one of the most important part of these audits is related to logs. Why? Because the logs act as evidence. For example, I want to demonstrate something to someone else, to other. Okay, I can use the logs. Different logs, system logs, audit logs, application logs, network management logs, network traffic logs, or something like that. I can use those logs to describe something, to demonstrate something to someone else. Why this event happens. Okay, why? I should analyze the logs. Should check the logs and analyze it. Why this happens? Why this fails? Okay. So until now, we understand that if a security issue happened, it would be costly for me. So I should be care about the security risks. Oh, what is risk? We define it as everything that threat my assets. My assets are target for those threat. Okay. So I need to manage the risks to identify what are my assets in the organization, okay, and what traits, what vulnerabilities are related to those assets in my organization. Okay, I should manage them. I should identify them, and I should control them. But firstly, I should identify my assets and their values. This process, asset identification, evaluation, and prioritization, this process is an iterative process. It means that one day I start to identify the assets and put them in different categories, evaluating them, presenting some priority for different elements, okay? And for example, a few months later, a few years later, I should repeat this process. Again, I should identify new assets. Some assets are removed from my network. I should find them, remove them from my list. I should add some new assets to my list. But what is asset? People, procedures, softwares, hardwares, networks. Okay, all of them are the element of an organization system. Okay, but when we define them, identify them, we should categorize them. We should put them in different categories. Why? Because some threats, some assets are more important than the rest. Some of them. So I categorize those assets in different classes, classify them, and then according to those classification, I try to evaluate and valuation those assets. Okay. How can I identify an asset? It's clear. I should describe an asset based on some attributes. Okay. For example, a man or a woman in the system. He or she has a position. Okay. I should understand his position, his name, her name, or her ID, his ID. Okay. And who is the supervisor of this man? What is the level of security for this man? What about this should do everything. Okay. For people, we can talk about this position, name, user ID, supervisor, security clearance level, skills, special skills, or something like that. For procedures, we can describe intent purpose. This procedure is used for something like that, for example. Okay, and we should check those attributes. For any update. For example, someone else changed the storage location. Okay, I should be cared about those. changes. What about data? When I'm talking about data, I can, for example, say that which type of classification has been used, who is the owner, creator, or manager of those data, what is the structure, size of data, which structure is used right now. These are some attributes related to assets, okay? Data assets. Are they online or they are offline, their location, their backup strategy, or something like that. I can use all of them. So there are several. I will talk about this. Sorry, the advantages of identifying the risk. I will talk it in this session. So, firstly, I should identify my assets, procedures, hardware, softwares, peoples, everything. I should identify them using their attributes. Okay, but maybe someone asks me, okay, which attributes I should use? It depends. For example, uh, if I'm talking about the students, I should uh, learn about the student numbers. But outside of the university, the student number is not important. Inside the university, yes, it's important. But outside of the university, it's not important. Uh, so when we are talking about the asset identification, I should clear it. Which attributes should be defined here? It depends. It depends on the level of risk management in the organization. It depends on the management strategies for different technologies. Okay, in different communities. It depends. For example, suppose that I have a computer. In this computer, I can define a computer by its name, its IP address, its MAC address, its element type, its serial numbers, its manufacturer, its part numbers, uh, its softwares, everything. Its location, physical location or logical location. We should identify it, but do we need the whole of these attributes? No. Maybe sometimes yes, maybe, but not always. Okay? So, based on our needs, or security strategy, or tracking strategy, we only need to define only some of those attributes. Okay. Most of companies, most of organizations have some data classification strategies. For example, maybe in some organization, maybe you see that, okay, this data is confidential, this one is public, this one is internal. They are completely different. Completely different. Some data are confidential, some of them internal, some of them public. Why? Why just a few organizations and companies use this strategy? Because they like this strategy. Okay? They like it. They want to do it. After classification, data classification, we have another step. We should determine the priority level of those components. Okay? Why? Because those classification, for example, data in the public category is not important as much as confidential data. So we put them in different classes and we determine some priority levels. Please note that those categories, those classification must be mutually exclusive. They are, those classes must be completely separated from each other. And those categories must be comprehensive. They must be complete, but they must be mutually exclusive, completely separated. Okay, I identify the assets and put them in different categories. What is the next step? The next step is valuation, defining the value of each of those assets. To make it clear, firstly, I should answer some questions, some main questions. Is this asset critical for my organization success? Is this asset generate the most profit in my company? Generates the most revenue in my company? How much should I pay if I try to replace this one or protect it? How much should I pay? What would be the most embarrassing or cause greatest liability of relieved? What will happen uh, if I lost the control of those assets? Okay, I should answer to these questions. Firstly, to find the value of an asset. The most valuable assets are standing among the most critical items for my organization's success. They are stand among the most um, they are generating the most part of profit in my organization. Okay, so based on these level and based on these questions, I should create some levels. To evaluate those assets. Okay, for example, look at one here. This is a worksheet for asset identification. Okay, in an information system. You can see in the left column you can see some information on assets. Logistic, be able to outsource, I don't know, supplier order or supplier fulfillment advice or customer order via SSL, customer service report via the email, or something like that. Okay, edge router, web server 1, web server 2. There are different assets. Some of them are put it in this table here. In the middle column, you can see here, you can see some of those data are placed in the confidential group. Some of them are public, some of them are private, and something like that. There are different classes here: confidential, private, public. What is the relation between these classifications and people? The right column talk about the impact of profitability. For example, you can see that when we are talking about the logistic to outsource, impact is high. For supplier order, the impact is high. But supplier fulfillment service, its impact is medium. For the edge router, for example, about the edge router, this edge router is placed in public. But if If I lost it, I don't know what will happen. I will lose the internet in my organization if I lost the edge router or something like that. You can see some of those are public. And its impact is critical. It's public, but its impact is critical. So we should be clear about the people from the past to the future. We always should redo these steps. Okay. So based on these, I can create some categories and define the try to evaluate the different items. And I can act based on those categories. Categories that I put everything on them. Okay. Now I want to prioritize them. Okay, this asset is placed here, doing something like that. So it's very important. I should calculate the relative importance of each of those applications. We know that these assets, maybe it's old, but or maybe it's new. This asset has a value. And those values are based on their importance. So simply, I can define some weighting factors and use those weighting factors. I can reorder my list based on those uh, information, those factors or something like that. Okay, I will put them in order of their importance, something like this. You get this one here. There are different assets. This one here, for example, customer order via SSL. You can see here, for example, if I want to use to in my e-business, I have an e-business. What is the effect of SSL? I know SSL is important for e-business, so we can see that its effect on the revenue, its effect on profitability, and its uh, public image, all of them has weight of 10 or weight of 1. But look at the rest, all of them are below. They are less than SSL. Those weights are less than SSL. If I look on this, I can see here customer order via SSL is the most item, and I should, for example, here I should apply the SSL. But here, this one here, it's not important. Its weight score is 4. The total weight is 41 for this item. Look at this one here, the right column. If I rearrange these items, if I have not enough money to cover these issues, okay, let me show you an example. But one main question, okay, I try to classify my assets, okay? Maybe you, in your home, define a local classification. Maybe this classification is happened by some people. We know that the classification is something we know that different organization has different classification strategies. Each one has its own responsibility. The owner, for example, the information owner is responsible for classifying their information base. Okay, we need a strategy to classify um, the information owner are responsible for the classifying those information assets. But one more thing, we need to re-evaluate. And we need to review periodically. We need to review those classifications periodically. Okay? Especially in military zones, especially in sites related to um, military. Uh, Most of organizations don't need detailed levels of or classification used by military. What does it mean? It means that in military, we have several levels of classification, okay? Different classes. But outside of the military zone, we don't need too many classes. Maybe we can say, okay, this item, this asset is public, this one is private, maybe, or doing something like that. The whole organization needs to do this to classify their data. Whole organization. The organization need to do data classification, but when we talk about the levels of this strategy, we talk about the details, we talk about uh, talk about different types of the organization. Every the whole organization needs doing this classification, but its level, number of levels, and their depths are different from one organization to another. After classification, we need to do something else. Security clearance. What is security clearance? Security clearance means that for each data user, we need to define a single level of authorization. The data user needs to handle the data. Okay? For each data user, we define a single level of authorization. Because those data user needs to access to classified data. Okay. So to make it simple, make it simple, we only must say that okay, this user have this level of authorization. This one needs this level. This one needs this level. One by one. I should clearly say that this data user has this single level of authorization. And after defining those levels, each employee in the organization must knows about those security issues, those levels of authorization. He or she needs to know the requirement based on his level of authorization. Employee must need to know the requirement. They must know. Sometimes we are using extra level of protections. Why? Because I want to ensure that my confidential data are maintained. They are not revealed. Okay, let me go further. We have some data. I classified them. Okay. That data needs storage, needs distribution strategy. It needs distribution, portability, and destruction of classified data. We should know all of this. How about for a classified data? How I store them in the network? How that data is stored? How that data is distributed in the network? Is this data portable or no? How can I destroy those data? We should be clear about the data with higher level of classifications. But some data, for example, are not important. They are public, they are unclassified. Okay? So simply I can check them. For example, there is a policy, clean desk policy. Based on this policy, we need that we need to ensure that all information are stored in their appropriate storage every day. Okay? And one part is storing the information in their appropriate storage and destroy the rest of copy of those data. Daily, every day, we should do this. Storage the required data, and destroy the rest of those data, especially the rest copy of those data. There are some copies of data, okay? I should save one of them, stored one copy, and destroy the rest of destroy the rest copy of those data. We call it clean disk policy. But here, when we destroy this one, for example, you write some data on papers, okay, and you put when you finish your work, you put those papers in the garbage. Okay, I destroyed it. No, I don't. You don't. There are some special guys, we call them dumpster diving people. Dumpster diving will search the garbage. Why? Maybe they find something interesting. I wrote by mistake. Okay, I write something on the paper, and after finishing my job, I put it in the garbage. I write something important on the paper, and at the end, I put that data in the garbage, in the recycle bin. Okay? In my mind, I destroyed it because I put it in the recycle bin, in the garbage. But it doesn't destroy it. Some other guys, dumpster divers, are standing outside and they will search my garbage, my rubbish. If they find something interesting, for example, if they find my username and my password, simply the dumpster divers will find an access to those data. Just it happens by something like this. Okay, let me go further. We say that some threads are important, some of them are not. But in reality, we need to investigate those threads. We should answer to these questions. Which threads presents danger to assets? Which thread? Maybe some threads are around me, but never represent danger or something like that for me. Which threat represent the most danger to information? How much would it cost to recover from the attack? Which threat requires great expenditure to prevent? Look on these questions for basic questions. I'm looking for only some threats. I cannot cover the whole threats. Why? Because of money. My budget is limited. I cannot cover the whole threats. My budget is limited. So by this question, I try to limit everything related to the most dangerous threat for my pocket, for my company, for my data. I find the most dangerous item threats. Forget the rest. Just find the most one. Which threat represents the most danger to information? Which one presents something like that? Which one presents something like this? Which one needs to pay money? How can I prevent this threat? How much should I spend to prevent different attacks, different threats? You know, it's not easy. But this question helps us in this way. Okay? Again, look on this table here. Here you can find 12 different threats related to the information security. 12 different categories. Category of threats. The first one is interesting. Act of human error or failure. Someone do something wrong. Someone did something wrong. Maybe by mistake. Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe it's an accident. Compromising the intellectual property. Deliberate the act of espionage. Deliberating act of information extraction, deliberating act of sabotage or vandalism, deliberating act of theft, act of deliberating software attacks, force of nature, quality of service, deviation from service provider, uh, technical hardware failure or errors, technical software failure or errors, technological obsolescence. Absolute. There are 12 different categories of uh, information. Let me talk about these items, talk about some of them. Uh, we talked about them in the past. Okay, for example, we talked about human error, we talked about force of nature, we talked about them in the past. But some of them, maybe some of them are more important for me. Those risks may provide some vulnerability to my assets. Maybe. But what is vulnerability? Here we have a definition of vulnerability. A specific avenue threat agent can exploit, an agent exploit the threat to attack an information asset. Specific avenues threat agents can exploit the attack. Exploit means that using a hole, creating a hole to attack something else. Okay. Here we are talking about information assets. So we should be clear about the vulnerabilities. Okay, which threat can make a vulnerability? All of them. How it could penetrate and make a vulnerability to the organization's assets. It's something interesting. We should examine them. It's not easy to do this, to find the assets, classify them, make prioritization on them, finding the threats, and now we're talking about their vulnerabilities. Doing these jobs, this work, it's not easy. We need too many sessions, brainstorm sessions, to do these steps. Okay, we have to did it. We have to do this brainstorm tasks. Why? People want to do their jobs. So we need these sessions. I know those sessions are brainstorming storming sessions. We need to know about them. By doing this, applying those sessions, what will happen? At the end of those sessions, we should prepare a list of different risks. Okay, this risk is related to this asset, and if it happens, for example, I lost something like this with this value, and for each of those uh, assets, I can prepare some details about their vulnerability. Okay, I should go into the risk identification process. But if you remember, I said that, okay, each of those assets has its value, and each of those risks may present some cost for me. So we need risk assessment. It means that for each vulnerabilities, I should evaluate the relative risks. I should create a risk rating strategy, a scoring strategy. Risks related to my information assets. I should create this strategy to rate the risks. I want to make it clear. Okay, this is my list. Okay, this is my list. I want to protect my assets against those risks. I should rate them. I should score them to make it clear which of those risks are important, which of them are not. Another term is likelihood, the probability that a specific vulnerability will be the object of a successful attack. It's a probability. Okay, this risk, this attack, is this attack a successful attack? And if it's successful, you know, the probability that a specific vulnerability will be the object of a successful attack. It means that an attack happens, it must be successful. And one of the objects of that successful attack is vulnerability. With a chance. Okay, we know that the probability is a number between 0 to 1 or between 0 to 100. It depends on the strategy. But we exclude the 0 here. We exclude the 0. Why? Because my knowledge is not complete. Okay, maybe I forget something in my review. Maybe I forget something. And maybe some vulnerability remains in my asset. Maybe. So never we use 0 in likelihood. Never. We start from 0.1% to 1 to 100. Okay. We should select this strategy. But one more important thing. We don't use 0. Okay. We need to create a model, a rating model for the whole assets and their vulnerabilities. Why? Because I'm trying to rank the threads. I need this model, find a unique model to rank the whole risks based on their vulnerabilities. So I should select a rating model, a constant rating model. Means that I should apply it for the whole risks in my system. Maybe we can use external references for this model. Okay. Sometimes we can use external models, external references to create this rating model. How we can do this? How we can determine the risks? It's easy. Look at this equation here. The relative risk assessment, relative, it's relative risk assessment. For the purpose of relative risk assessment, we use this equation here. Likelihood of vulnerability of occurrence times in value or impact of that asset minus 2% of a controlled risk. How much we can control a risk? The percentage risk already controlled plus an element of uncertainty. What does it mean? Let me show you here. Show it here. Okay. This part here means that what is the probability of occurrence of that risk? Maybe you say, okay, for example, this risk can happen with 10%, with probability of 10%. Okay, it's a it's the effect, the cost of that occurrence. Okay, how much I should I know that if I don't control, if I don't control a risk, it may happen, and this happening will cost for me. So the first part of this means that the cost of that asset times in the probability of occurrence of that risk. The probability times in the real value of that asset. This is my cost. If this cost is low, it doesn't important. I can forget it. Okay, but sometimes this cost is not a limited cost. Okay, so the first part means that how much should I pay if that risk happens? Okay. The amount of damage, the first part means is the amount of damage if that risk happens. Okay. The second part, look at this one here. This is the second part. It consists of two different parts. The first one is that how much can I save if I apply a risk control strategy in my organization? How much I can save? Look at this, the first part of this one here, minus percentage risk orbit control. The real cost minus my cost to control the risks, plus an element of uncertainty. What does it mean? I'm adding an uncertainty element here. It means that maybe my risk control strategy fails, maybe. Okay, so this one here may change. So in the second part, we just try to add an uncertainty element to show that maybe I make a mistake and the real cost of a risk more than this. Maybe my estimation is wrong. Maybe I overestimate, make it overestimate, maybe underestimate. Okay, so we add an element of uncertainty here. Shows that everything may change. Okay, let me. Okay. Here, what is the result of this formula here? The total of this equation here is the real cost for me if that risk happens. I'm saying, okay, this risk happens. I have to pay some penalties, but my control strategy for this risk can save this amount of money for me. Is it good? Yes or no? If it's good, okay, pay money to control the risk. If it's not good, it's your choice. You should change your control strategy. This equation shows that you cannot choose expensive control strategy always. No. Choose your technologies, your control technologies, based on their costs and their performances. Here in this slide, we talked about the cost of those risks and how the control strategy can reduce those costs, can save money for me. Okay. The next slide is about the possible control strategies, but let's have a break. Okay. Current time is 10 minutes to 5. Let's have a break for 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, we will go back to the lecture, okay? Go to a break for 15 minutes. Okay? Can you hear my voice? Yes or no? Can you hear my voice? If you can hear my voice, we have a 15-minute break. 15 minutes break. I will continue the lecture next 15 minutes. In next 15 minutes, okay? During this time, I will pause the record and I will cut the sound. See you in 15 minutes. Next. Okay. Before the break, we talked about the risks and we try to evaluate the cost of those risks if they happen. and we say that what will happen if we control them? What about the cost? Here in this formula here, we say that minus percentage risk already controlled. It means that if I put some efforts to control that risk, the cost of occurrence of that risk will decrease. So the question is this: how I can control a risk? To answer this question, I can say that for each risk, each threat, and its associated vulnerabilities, we should create a preliminary basic list of control idea. Okay, to control this risk, this threat, I can use number 1, number 2, number 3. I will create a basic risk. Okay. You know, I know that here, look at this one here. For each threat and associated vulnerability that have residual risk. What is residual risk? We say that residual risk is a risk that remains to information asset even after existing control has been applied. What does it mean? It means that I applied a control mechanism to control a risk, control a threat, preventing a threat to be happened. Okay, but using this strategy, using this control mechanism, sometimes I can remove that threat forever. Okay, sometimes. But sometimes I know that my control strategy is effective just for a while, not forever. For example, when you are sitting in a car, you must fasten your seatbelt. Why? Because in the car crash, it can save your life. It will keep you and save your life. And even airbag in the car. Airbag and seatbelt, they are safety mechanisms inside the cars. Okay, placed inside the car. But we know that even if we use seatbelt or airbag or something like that, maybe in some cases, maybe the driver and the person inside the car died in a car crash. Maybe. For example, a car fall into a valley, for example. Okay, a car fall into a valley. So it will destroy it completely. Here, in this case, we say that okay, using the seatbelts and airbag can reduce the risks, the probability of occurrence, the risk, but they cannot remove the risk completely. They cannot. So we call it residual risk, a risk that it remains even after applying a control mechanism. Okay, it's very important. We should note to this item. One of good control mechanisms is using access control. It means that we create a list, and based on this list, we control accessing user systems and different items to different parts. For example, we can create mandatory access control. It means that we create a list that only people in that list can access to a control. It's mandatory. Okay, just a few users have enough right to access the data. It's mandatory control access. Sometimes we have non-discretionary controls. Sometimes we can use discretionary access controls. What is the difference between them? In non-discretionary control, we have a role-based or task-based center. We have a authority center. Okay, that authority center create a role-based or a task-based access control. It means that, for example, my job has been changed to a new one. I receive a post. I get a post. Okay. Based on my new position, I will receive some new access to data inside the university because of my new job, my new position. It's a role-based or task-based control. Sometimes we have to use this type. For example, if a man who is working in financial department, the staff needs to access to financial data of the university. He or she needs to access that because of his job, his role. Okay, this is a non-discretionary method, granting an access to data based on the new role, the new task. Okay, in discretionary access control, we create an option for data user to control the access. Okay, so we can use different types of control, but let me go ahead. We applied risk assessment in the previous section. When it completes, the risk assessment operation completes, we must rank the whole vulnerabilities of the risk in a sheet. We put the whole vulnerability related to a risk in a worksheet and we rank them. We say that, okay, this asset has these risks and this risk has these are related to these vulnerabilities. If this vulnerability happens, its impact is something like this. Its likelihood is something like this. Its rating factor is this. We put everything in a worksheet, calculating the result. The result is the assessment of that risk. The result will show us that which risk is the most important one? We should focus on which of those risks to control them. I cannot control the whole risk. I should select the top risk. So, using this documentation, worksheet, I can choose those top risks in my organization. Okay. Here you can see different sheets. Okay. What will happen after that? I must select the top risk in my organization to control them. Okay. Now I have different choices to control those risks. There are 4 different strategies to control each risk. Number one, I can use safeguard technologies to avoid that risk. Number 2, I can transfer a risk from one place, one situation to another. Number 3, I can mitigate that risk, reducing the impact of that risk. If that risk happens, its impact on my organization will be reduced. We call it mitigation. And number 4, I will do nothing. I will accept the consequence. Okay, this happens. Okay, I accept it. Interesting. I accept it. Why? Because it's nothing. Let me talk about this one. When we talk about avoidance, it means that I do everything. I put my efforts to prevent exploitation of that vulnerability. It means that I should cover everything, every holes in my organization to prevent that exploitation. Maybe we need remove some assets, removing different vulnerability, making some limited access, adding different safeguard technologies. We can add several monitoring tools, something like that. There are 3 common methods for risk avoidance: application of policy, training and education, and applying technology. We can use these methods. Training and education means that is a choice for employees. Train employee, okay, never do this. Okay, or applying new policies in the system, or using new technology. Transference means that I do something to shift the risk from one place to another one, from one asset to another one, from one process to another one, from one organization to another one. Okay, for example, for the university, I can hire some people to manage this university, the servers of the university. Okay, I hire you. You are the security staff, security manager of these servers. You must protect them. You must defend against security threats. Okay, it's a choice. But instead of this, I can say, okay, instead of hiring a new person, okay, put your server in that ISP. Bring your server to that ISP. Give them money monthly, give them some money. They will protect your servers. Don't worry about that. By this, I transfer the risk, associated with the management of those systems and something like that. If something happens, oh, ISP, you act against our contract. Hackers attack to my servers. You are the responsible to protect my servers. I transfer the risk. That ISP should protect my data based on my contract. This is a transference strategy. Instead of doing it myself, someone else can do it. Okay. Mitigation. Mitigation means that we plan some strategies to reduce the impacts of those exploitations. What does it mean? It means that in mitigation, a vulnerability exploited, a threat happens. Oh, what should I do right now? For example, there is a fire in the faculty, in the building. What should I do now? In this case, I cannot say, no, there is no risk for fire in the building. No. Right now, there is a fire in the building. And now what should I do? Here, we have three types of plans: IRP, DRP, and BCP. Incident response plan, disaster recovery plan, and business recovery plan. Incident means a little a limited incident, a limited event. For example, a limited fire. Okay. In IRP, I will try to answer to that limited event. For example, a pipe is broken. It's a limited event, limited incident. Or somewhere we have fire in some places in the university, in the building, in one class. Okay, it's an incident. So IRP, incident response plan, try to answer to these incidents. What should I do now? What should I do? But sometimes we are faced with a big event, force of natures, a big fire, flood, earthquake, something like that. In this case, I should have a greater plan. Why? Because the disaster has a great negative impact on my business. So I should have a plan for this case. And the last one was BCP. BCP means business continuity plan. Okay, a disaster happened. I try to cover it. Okay, what should I do after the disaster? What should I do after disaster? My business is alive. I'm alive. I should continue my business after that disaster. It's a catastrophic event, I know. It's hard for all of us, I know. But my business should continue. BCP responds to this item. How your business can continue after a catastrophic event, after a disaster. Acceptance means that a risk happens, vulnerability exploited. Okay, it happens. I accept it. What should I do? You know, you can do this. You can do acceptance just for a few functions, just for particular functions. For example, today one of the employees is sick. Okay, someone else can come and do his job. You know, I accept. Maybe one day, for a few days, I lost my employee for a few period of times. For example, for 1 or 2 weeks. Maybe he goes to vacation, I don't know. Maybe he's ill, he's sick, I don't know. I accept it. It's something possible. And we do nothing to cover this. To cover this type of events, I do nothing. I accept the cost. Why? Because if I try to protect this type of functions to overcome this exploitation, I have to pay lots of money. It's costly to apply control mechanism for something like this. It's not important. My employee is absent for 1 or 2 weeks. Okay. He will return. Why should I, for example, hire a new person for such cases? Why? Okay, do his job. He goes to vacation. Okay, do his job. Goes vacation, do his job. Okay. The organization agrees and accept the risk of accept that risk of that exploitation. It's a trade-off. Okay, if I accept this exploitation, I will lose, for example, this amount of money. I will lose this. If I control it, I should pay this amount. I should pay this. Okay, which of them is better? Accepting it, not paying for that. When it happens, I will accept it and pay penalty, or right now I pay for the control mechanism to remove the risk. It's a strategy. Okay. Based on today's lecture, we learned that the threat have different levels, and the assets have different values. These level of threats, and these value of assets, plays a major role to select the best strategy. But there's some rules of thumb for this strategy selection. We can use this one. For example, we should answer this question. and applying strategy based on this question. When a vulnerability exists, when a vulnerability can be exploited, when attacker's cost is less than potential gain, when potential loss is substantial. Firstly, I should answer to these 4 questions. Okay, I'm answering to them, and then, okay, based on these questions, accept this item, mitigate this item, control this item, blah blah blah. Okay, using these questions. After answering to this question, I can select my strategy. Okay, what should I do? Okay, forget this one, accept it. This one, mitigate it. This one, oh, it's important. Remove it. Pay money and remove it. Apply different strategies. Here, what I thought is that always, as an engineer, always we should do something cost benefit. We are engineer. Our final choice must be cost benefit. So always we need to do cost benefit analysis. It's a common approach to decide about those controls. Those controls must be economic, must be feasible. I'm trying to implement them, so they must be economic, they must be feasible. So when I'm talking about cost benefit analysis, it means that I should evaluate the worth of my assets, those assets that should be protected. Okay, the worth of those assets is something like this. Okay, and how much will be lost if those assets are compromised? I should analyze them. I should evaluate them. And after that, okay, the weights of this assets is something like this. And if I don't control them, I will lose something like this. If I use this strategy, I will lose something like this. The value of loss. For this case, we have to create a special document. We call it cost benefit analysis and economic feasibility study. We must create this document and say, okay, why we choose this strategy, why we choose acceptance, mitigation, removing, something like that. Why we choose this strategy. Use this one here, this equation here. The annual loss expectancy, total amount of loss in a year, equals to single loss expectancy if I lost this asset. How much I will lose? How much money I should pay if I lost this asset? Okay, single loss expectancy times in annual rate of occurrence. This loss would happen 2 times per year. This one would happens 10 times in a year. Okay, annual rate of occurrence. If we calculate this, we can say, okay, if I don't control this threat, this risk, my loss is this in the year. during the year, I will lose this amount of money. Okay, what about the complete amount of loss? You know, I should calculate the amount of loss prior of implementing a new strategy minus 1 the amount of loss after implementing a new strategy minus 1 the annualized cost of the safeguard. This is the cost benefit analysis. How much I will lose if I never use a control mechanism, how much I will save if I implement a control strategy. Okay, we should calculate this one to find that what should we do. Should we accept it? Should we remove it? Should we mitigate it? But what should we do? After selecting the strategy, we can go and implement those control strategy. But what is important that it's not the end of this process. We must continually, we must control, monitor, and reevaluate our surveys. Maybe I made a mistake, for example, to estimate the residual risk. In practice, I found that my estimation is not correct. Continually, I should monitor systems, reevaluate. As long as the organization continues its function, we have to continue this risk control procedure. We have to this. As long as my organization is alive. Okay. Let me, okay, that is, okay. One main question. Until now, I prepare a quantitative control practice. It means that I prepare some formula, and based on those formula, you can calculate, okay, if I don't use control strategy, I will lose this amount of money. If I use control strategy, I will lose this amount of money. So I can choose different strategy. We are working with numbers, so we called it quantitative control practice. We did everything based on the values. But maybe in some cases, we have some metrics, some variables that we cannot evaluate them based on equations, based on numbers. Okay. Their characteristics is not a number. Okay, I will finish it. Mohammed. In this case, instead of using specific estimates, I should utilize some scales, because I cannot convert those qualitative values into quantitatives. I cannot change them into values, into numbers, So I have to use qualitative risk management, risk control strategies. We can use benchmarks and best practice for risk management. Why? Because benchmarking and best practice, using benchmark and best practice, I can, in benchmark, I can test my organization. Testing and comparing my organization, for example, my security levels in my organization with another organization. Okay. This measurement, this comparison can be a metric, using a metric-based or process-based measurements, and we can use two different strategies. Standard of due care, it means that we adopt level of security for legal defense. Okay. And at that time, the organization must show that, okay, what did our organization with respect to another organization, okay, with respect to similar circumstance, what is the rank of our organization with respect to the others. Due diligence means that the organization is diligent to ensure that implementation standard continuously to provide a required level of protection. It means that due diligence means that, okay, there is a threshold, my organization covered this threshold, okay, that's enough. Okay, this is due diligence. My organization covered this threshold, so that's enough. I never compare myself, my organization, with another organization. In a standard of due care, I compare my organization with the rest. But in due diligence, I say that, okay, I passed this standard, I passed this level, I passed this threshold. That is enough. But one more thing. If the organization failed to do standard of due care or due diligence, maybe it can leave organization open to legal liability. Remember this. It can leave organization to open to legal liabilities. Okay. Why you didn't adhere to my practice? Why? You were not care about the security standards in your organization, and from your organization, hackers attack to my organization. It's a legal liability. Why? Because the organization could not support those security standards. So it's good to use benchmark or at least use best practice. Best practice means that someone else doing something and I will try to repeat their experience. Here what we are talking about information protection. So just they can do this. But how we can say that this practice is good for my organization? It's very important. Can I use every best practice, the whole best practice in the world in my organization? No. When? Which of those best practice is good for my organization? When I should adopt this best practice to my company, to my organization? To answer this question, I should answer to these three questions. Does organization resemble identified target with best practice? Are resource at hand similar? Is organization in a similar threat environment? You have to choose those best practice that their conditions, their environment have some similarity with your organization. For example, having similar resources, having similar threat environment. Okay? Having similar strategy, having similar trend, having similar functionality. We can use just this practice, not the whole practice in the world. For example, we are in the university. Can we use the best practice from military zone, military sections in the university? No. Why? Because the best practice in military cases are very strictly, very tight. But it's not too tight in the education. It's not too tight. But in the military, yes, it's tightly. Okay? But what is the problem with best efforts? The first one is that organization never talks to each other about their best practice. This is the biggest problem in this case. The organization never talk about their experience. Number two, no two organizations are identical. Even two universities, they are not identical. So their best practice would be different. Best practices are a moving target. It means that someone did a best practice last year, and now I want to repeat it. Okay, what was the target of that best practice in the last year? Maybe that target is over. So why should I repeat that best practice? It's over. It's finished. Especially, we must know that in the recent year, what was going on in information security industry in recent years through benchmarking does not necessarily prepare for what's next. Knowing what happens in industry security in recent years, does not necessarily prepare for what's next. What happens in the last year? It doesn't mean that I can use them in the future years. It doesn't necessarily prepare me for the future. Yes, it's good. I know. Commonly, it's good. Generally, it's good. But it's not necessarily. There is no necessity for this. Okay, if you do this next year, you will be secure. No, there is no necessity. Remember this. There is no necessity. And this is the last slide. After doing, as an engineer, remember this, as an engineer, after doing each of the steps in your organization, after doing each steps, you have to prepare documents. Especially in this case, you have to prepare document for control strategies, especially when you are working with residual risk. You must prepare good documents for control strategies. It must clearly identify, okay, this residual risk will remain. Do this. Or you can prepare a document, say that, okay, this control strategy has these shortcomings. Okay, for this asset, this vulnerability, I use this control strategy, but this control strategy has these shortcomings. We can create a document like this. Okay, there's a shortcoming here. What should I do? This strategy has some shortcomings. Okay, some outcomes. Especially when we talk about risk assessment, we must document it. Okay, we can document it based on topic specific report. Okay, for this topic, we do this risk assessment, risk analysis, and this is the result. Use this control strategy. Okay, so remember, always as a manager, as a security manager, always as an engineer, always document your findings, your result. Always. In the future, you will need those documents. I promise. You will need those documents. So, forever, always write documents on your work, about your results. Okay? This is the last slide of this lecture. Don't be tired in Farsi. I wish the best for you in the at the end of this week. Tomorrow afternoon, we will have the quiz of chapter 2. Remember that. Tomorrow afternoon, we will have the exam of chapter 2. Quiz of chapter 2. Don't forget it. Okay? Is there any question? Any question?